Hello! Today we are going to review the standard way to create a standing purchase order, or SPO, for maintenance agreements. While there are a wide variety of maintenance agreements for each property that will require SPOs, today we are going to focus on vertical transportation as our example. Each SPO for maintenance should be backed by a signed contract, and the PO will allow tracking of that contract spend as well as providing the supplier a purchase order to bill against using the Coupa portal. So let's start. As we create our requisition that will turn into our purchase order, we need to understand the items that the contract governs. So in our example today, vertical transportation, our agreement not only covers the preventative maintenance side and fees, but also misuse and abuse and other maintenance charges that we may see over the life of the contract. So because this agreement covers both, we're going to need to do two requisitions today. First, for the preventative maintenance flat fees that are committed spend. Second, the misuse, abuse, and additional fees we may see in this contract. So let's begin. Where we start is in the what do you need field, because the items we're talking about today are not going to be covered in a punch out or a catalog. We're going to need to create a free text. So we're going to go over here to write a request, and we're going to begin with our PM agreement fees. So we want to start with our PM agreement for elevators and escalators. And in this example, our agreement has 3 more years on our contract. 2 have already gone by. So this is actually going to be year 3 of our agreement. If you're starting one from scratch, you'll begin with year 1. But we want to include everything left on the agreement since we're entering into this purchase order partially through our contract. So we want to start with this description, move to quantity, because we know that there's a set amount of billings and a set price through the life of this agreement. We want to select our supplier. In this case, it is ThyssenKrupp. So as I start to type, it's actually going to drop down the supplier's name, and I'm going to select. Our commodity is going to be repair and maintenance. And our unit price and our quantity is going to be reflected by the preventative maintenance payment agreement that I have for year 3. So if it's an annual, I will type in the annual amount due. If it is monthly, I will type in the monthly amount due and change the quantity to 12. It could be quarterly, which I would type in the quarterly amount and then type in 4. Since this is for a year of the agreement, I want to make sure that my unit price and quantity reflect the number of payments and the correct price for those payments. In this example today, we're actually going to do an annual payment, and then we know that the payment is usually due in May. So I want to take my need by date and say that it's due in May. The rest of this information will default based on the contract loaded and the supplier information, and it's not necessary for us to fill out. So because I have a couple more years to enter, I'm actually going to come down to write multiple requests, select, and add to cart. This is actually going to keep the majority of my information and only blank out my description. So I want to keep this because it's for year 4 of my agreement. Type in my description, change my need by date to 2022, because that is when year 4 payment is due, and add to my cart. As you can see, I'm going to continue this until I have covered the rest of my agreement, and then add to my cart. When I'm done adding all the lines to the cart, I'm going to exit. Once I'm in my cart, I'm actually going to use the on behalf of feature, and I'm going to create this on behalf of another person in my department. That way, both myself and Clint will have the ability to receive against this SPO through its lifetime. The other details I want to check are my ship to address, my department, my property information, and make sure all that's defaulting correctly. If deposits are required, yes or no, capital yes or no, if this is a contract routing form, which it is not. Typically, the answers to these will be no for SPOs unless your contract dictates differently. As we scroll down, we're going to go into our items. As you can see, here's all the information we just entered. The only thing I have left to check is my billing stream here. I need to make sure that my billing stream is where I want these charges to hit on my P&L. So I can actually update all of these at once by selecting all, edit selected, and then here I'm allowed to do two things. I can either select and type in billing stream if I know what it is, or I can select this choose an account feature and type in some items if I know the department, if I know the account number. I can type in what I'm looking for and hit search, and then it gives me all the options that kind of fall into those search parameters. And from here, I can select the item or the correct general ledger code that I find and choose. Once I hit adjust, it will update all of my lines to that correct GL code. So as soon as I'm done verifying that, everything looks correct. I know that I scroll down here, I can see all of the approvals this is going to go through. The first one is always pending buyer action. It's going to go to the buyers for review to make sure everything's correct in terms of cost, annual, the agreements loaded, etc. As soon as I'm done, I will just hit submit for approval. And that is how you create the first requisition for a maintenance SPO. Now, we talked earlier about the need for a misuse and abuse PO. Now, since that is not a set amount that we are contracted to spend, we are going to create a second requisition for that using the same methodology of write a request. We are going to cut a purchase order for the misuse and abuse of escalators and elevators. And we're going to spell everything correctly, for year 3 of my agreement. Now, this should only be for a year at a time because we're not quite sure how much we're going to spend. It's to the same supplier, same commodity. And so since we're not quite sure what we're going to spend on year 3 misuse and abuse, I'm going to actually change this to an amount and put an estimated value of spend here. So I believe I'm going to spend $120,000 for year 3 of misuse and abuse on escalators and elevators. Now, this could be an estimated dollar. It could be what you're budgeted for this amount. It could be what you spent last year. That is going to be up to you. But the vendor will not be able to use this PO to charge you more than this dollar value. And since we changed it to amount, they can charge small amounts over multiple invoices for the year, which is what we're looking for, since we're not quite sure how many of these fees and what the fees are going to be over this year 3 of our contract. So we do want to make sure, when does year 3 end? So year 3 for this particular agreement ends next October. So I want to make sure that I pick the right date, because it is from now until this date next year that this dollar value is estimated to be spent. And I want to add that to my cart. Now, once I review my cart, I am going to kind of do the same thing. I'm going to create it on behalf of another person in my department, so we both have visibility to this PO and we can both perform receipts. I'm going to verify all this information is correct. I don't owe deposits. This is not capital. This is not a contract routing form. And I'm going to scroll down to my items. Now, I am going to do the same practice of ensuring the information is correct, of ensuring the general ledger code is correct. Now, the last thing I need to remember is because this is an annual purchase order, I'm going to need to recreate this every year through the life of my agreement. So, put a reminder on your calendar, put a note on your desk, whatever you need to do to remind yourself this time next year, I'm going to need to recreate a misuse and abuse escalator and elevator rec for year 4 of my agreement. So once I've done all that, I have a reminder on my calendar for next year. I have looked up the right general ledger code to make sure that I am charging it to the right area. This is just an example. Your property may want it charged to somewhere differently, which is fine. As soon as I've done all that, again, it's going to go to pending buyer action. I want to make sure that it goes to the right people for approval, and this makes sense. And then I will submit for approval. That is how you create the 2 requisitions needed for SPOs for maintenance agreements.